Your neighbor retires at 62 with $1.8 million saved. 5 years later, he's miserable, picking up consulting gigs, rationing restaurant visits, and telling anyone who'll listen that retirement isn't what he thought it'd be. Meanwhile, another guy you know retired at 58 with half that amount. He's hiking the Rockies, spending time with grandkids, actually sleeping through the night. Same rough age bracket, same general geography, completely different outcomes. Here's the uncomfortable part. The difference had almost nothing to do with the money. Look, I spent 10 years running a business, surrounded by people who did everything right on paper, maxed out their 401ks, diversified portfolios, read all the books, and a shocking number of them hit retirement and discovered they'd optimized for the wrong variables entirely. Because here's what no one tells you until it's too late. Retirement doesn't fail because you ran out of money. It fails because you kept running the same mental operating system you used during your working years, and that system is fundamentally incompatible with what retirement actually requires. So I'm going to walk through 5 specific failure modes. Not the stuff you read in retirement brochures, not the fear-mongering about market crashes. These are the quiet psychological traps that slowly degrade quality of life, and they're nearly invisible until you know what to look for. Think of retirement as a software migration. You're moving from one operating system to another, and if you try to run your old programs on new hardware, everything glitches. First thing that quietly ruins retirement, you never turned off optimization mode. There's this guy I know, spent 30 years in corporate operations. Everything was a process improvement opportunity. Efficiency metrics, quarterly targets, constant optimization. He retires, and within 6 months, he's applying the same framework to his daily life. He's tracking his walking routes for maximum calorie burn per minute. He's price comparing grocery stores to save $4 a week. He's scheduling his days in 30-minute blocks because unstructured time feels wasteful. Here's the thing. That mindset made him successful. It got him to retirement with enough money. But now it's destroying the entire point of having free time because optimization requires a clear metric. In your career, it's revenue, profit, market share, whatever. But what's the optimization target in retirement? There isn't one. And when high achievers can't find a metric to optimize against, they default to optimizing everything, which is just another way of saying they can't relax. I see this constantly. People who spent decades in achievement mode and they literally don't know how to operate without external validation. The problem is your brain got wired for dopamine hits from checking boxes and hitting targets. Retirement doesn't provide that structure. So you either build new reward systems or you stay stuck in permanent low-grade anxiety, feeling like you should be doing something more productive. Now you might be thinking, okay, but staying productive is good, right? And sure, to a point. But there's a difference between being engaged and being unable to stop performing. What I'm describing is people who can't sit on a beach without mentally calculating the opportunity cost. The invisible cost here is peace of mind. You spend 40 years training yourself to never be satisfied with current results, and then you're supposed to just switch that off. Your brain doesn't work that way. Here's a specific example with actual numbers. Guy retires with $2.1 million. His withdrawal rate is 3.5% annually. So he's pulling about $73,000 a year. Comfortable, sustainable, but he can't stop checking his portfolio balance. Every market dip feels like a performance failure. He's running mental Monte Carlo simulations about sequence of returns risk at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. This is optimization mode bleeding into a context where it doesn't belong. The math works, the psychology doesn't. Second thing that quietly destroys retirement, the comparison treadmill speeds up, not slows down. During your working years, comparison had guardrails. You compared yourself to people in your industry, your salary band, your region. Retirement removes all those boundaries. Now you're comparing your lifestyle to everyone. Your college roommate who sold his company, your brother-in-law with a military pension, that couple at church who just bought a second home in Arizona. Here's where the incentives get weird. During your career, if you felt behind, you could theoretically work harder, get promoted, increase income. You had agency. In retirement, your income is largely fixed, but the comparison instinct doesn't shut off just because you lost the ability to do anything about it. So you're stuck in this loop of noticing what other people have and feeling vaguely inadequate with no clear path to resolve the feeling. And social media makes this exponentially worse. I know people in their 60s scrolling through Facebook looking at vacation photos, and it's triggering the same status anxiety they had at 40, except now they can't just put in extra hours to afford the upgrade. The math is the math. But nobody tells you that emotional regulation becomes more important than asset allocation once you've actually retired. There was a study out of Boston College Retirement Research Center. They tracked retiree spending patterns. Turns out, people don't spend based on what they need, or even what they plan to spend. They spend based on what their peer group is spending. If your friends are taking European river cruises, suddenly your national park road trip feels inadequate. This is pure psychology. Your actual experience hasn't changed. Your relative positioning has. Here's what makes it insidious. Comparison doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like information. You're just noticing what's happening around you. But your brain is turning that information into a hierarchy, and then measuring your status within it, and then generating emotions based on where you land. And if you're not aware that's happening, you'll just feel inexplicably dissatisfied without understanding why. I watched someone close to me, retired with plenty of money, genuinely plenty, start feeling poor because two of his neighbors upgraded to newer luxury SUVs within the same month. His financial situation hadn't changed. His reference point had. And because he didn't recognize it as a reference point problem, he started wondering if he'd saved enough. That's the trap. You externalize your contentment criteria, and now you're playing a game with moving goalposts that you can't control. Third failure mode. And this one catches people completely off guard. You lose your identity and don't realize it until you're in free fall. Your job title was doing more work than you thought. It wasn't just a way to make money. It was a social shorthand for who you are. When someone asks what you do, and you say, I'm a project manager at a tech company, or I run a small manufacturing business, you're communicating competence, status, relevance. You're signaling that you contribute, that you're part of the economic engine. Then you retire. And now when someone asks what you do, you say, I'm retired. And watch what happens. The conversation dies or pivots, or they move on to someone more interesting. Because in American culture, you are what you produce. And if you're not producing, you're in this weird social limbo. I knew a guy who'd been a senior VP at a regional bank. Respected, well compensated, people returned his calls. He retires. And within a year, he's describing this feeling of becoming invisible. Same person, same intelligence, same experience base. But without the title, without the role, he couldn't figure out how to position himself. And here's the kicker. No one warned him this would happen. All the retirement planning focused on asset allocation and withdrawal strategies. Zero time spent on the fact that he was about to lose the primary framework he'd used to define himself for 35 years. This is where it gets really interesting. Because the advice everyone gives is find a hobby, volunteer, stay busy. But that's treating the symptom, not the disease. The disease is that you built your self-concept around external validation, and now the validation spigot is turned off. A hobby doesn't fix that. It's just another way to stay distracted from the fact that you don't know who you are when you're not performing a role. There's research from the National Bureau of Economic Research. They looked at self-reported life satisfaction pre- and post-retirement. And there's this consistent dip right after retirement, even among people who were desperate to leave their jobs. They called it the honeymoon hangover. First few months are great, you're decompressing. Then reality sets in. You have all this time, but you don't have a story about yourself that makes sense without work in it. Here's a concrete scenario. 60-year-old guy, let's call him Tom, retires from a career in pharmaceutical sales. Good at it, made decent money, identified strongly with being a top performer. First year of retirement, he's playing golf 3 times a week, traveling a bit, enjoying the lack of pressure. Year 2, he starts feeling purposeless. Golf isn't enough. He's not contributing. He starts saying yes to every volunteer opportunity, joins 3 boards, overcommits everywhere, and basically recreates the stress of his working life, because at least then he feels useful. What's happening? Tom never did the emotional work of separating his self-worth from his productivity, so retirement feels like irrelevance. And the only way he knows how to feel relevant is to be busy and needed. This is an identity problem masquerading as a scheduling problem. And most people never see it coming because it's not in any of the financial planning literature. Fourth thing that quietly wrecks retirement. The scarcity mindset you developed while accumulating wealth doesn't automatically switch off when you've accumulated enough. Here's the paradox. The personality traits that make you good at saving, discipline, delayed gratification, risk aversion, those same traits make it psychologically difficult to spend in retirement. You spent 30, 40 years training yourself to not buy things, to live below your means, to always be preparing for future scarcity. And then someone tells you it's time to enjoy the money, and your brain is like, absolutely not. We need to protect this. I see this with people who have multiple millions of dollars saved, objectively secure, could withstand multiple market crashes and still be fine. But they're agonizing over whether they can afford to replace their 15-year-old car, or they're splitting entrees at restaurants, or they're refusing to turn on the air conditioning until it hits 90 degrees. This isn't about the money. It's about the fact that their internal threat detection system is still calibrated for scarcity. There was a guy in my network, retired with just under $3 million in investable assets. No debt, low expenses, pension covering basics. He should have been golden. But he was making himself miserable trying to live on $40,000 a year because he was terrified of running out of money. I ran the numbers for him. Even with conservative assumptions, he could spend $80,000 a year and his portfolio would likely grow. But the math didn't matter. His emotional wiring said, spending down assets equals danger. This is what psychologists call the wealth effect in reverse. Normally, the wealth effect means people spend more as they feel richer. But for certain personality types, retirement triggers the opposite. They finally have the wealth, but they can't access the psychological permission to use it. And no amount of spreadsheet analysis fixes that. It's not a math problem. It's a nervous system problem. Here's where the irony gets thick. The same discipline that got you to financial independence becomes the prison that prevents you from enjoying financial independence. And the worst part? You probably won't even recognize it's happening. You'll just tell yourself you're being responsible, you're being smart. Meanwhile, you're deferring experiences and memories because your threat detection system hasn't updated its priors. Now, to be fair, there's a version of this that makes sense. Sequence of returns risk is real. The first few years of retirement matter disproportionately for long-term portfolio survival. If you retire into a bear market and start withdrawing, you can permanently damage your financial position. So some caution is rational, but what I'm describing isn't rational caution. It's paralysis. It's people with objectively sufficient resources behaving as if they're one bad month from poverty. Fifth thing, and this might be the quietest killer of all, the perpetual preparation fallacy. You keep waiting for the right moment to actually start living your retirement, and the right moment never comes. There's always a reason to wait. The market's volatile right now. Let's wait for stability. We're not quite sure about healthcare costs. Let's wait until we have more clarity. The house needs some work. Let's handle that first, then we'll travel. And year after year, life gets deferred. This is the same cognitive trap that keeps people from starting businesses or asking someone out. You're optimizing for perfect information in a system that never provides it. I know someone who retired at 63 with a detailed list of things he wanted to do. Learn to sail, take a cross-country train trip, spend a month in Italy. Reasonable goals, well within his budget. 5 years later, he still hasn't done any of it. Why? Because he's always waiting for things to settle, for the portfolio to recover a bit more, for his wife to feel ready, for the timing to be better. And meanwhile, he's 68 now, his energy isn't what it was, and the window is closing. Here's the brutal truth. The best time to do the things you've been deferring is right now. Not when you feel more prepared, not when circumstances align perfectly. Right now, because circumstances will never align perfectly, and the one resource you absolutely cannot replace is time. But people treat time like it's infinite, and money like it's scarce, when usually the opposite is closer to true. There's this concept in economics called option value, the value of keeping your options open. And it makes sense in certain contexts. But in retirement, people overweight option value and underweight experiential value. They keep all their options open by committing to nothing, and then they wake up 5 years later and realize they've experienced nothing. Let me give you a concrete case study with real numbers. John retires at 61 with $1.4 million in a mix of taxable accounts and IRAs. His plan shows he can safely withdraw $55,000 a year, adjusted for inflation. He wants to take his wife to New Zealand. Estimated cost is $12,000 for a nice trip. Well within budget, but he keeps postponing it. First year, he says, let's wait and see how the portfolio performs. Second year, there's some healthcare uncertainty. Third year, one of their kids is having financial trouble. Maybe we should keep some reserves. Fourth year, there's talk of a recession. By year 5, John's had a minor health scare, nothing serious, but now long flights feel more daunting. The trip keeps getting pushed back, and eventually, it just fades from possibility to fantasy. What's the actual cost? $12,000 spread across a $1.4 million portfolio is less than 1%. It's noise. But psychologically, it felt like a massive risk because John never recalibrated his risk framework from accumulation mode to distribution mode. In accumulation mode, spending $12,000 on a vacation is a real opportunity cost. That money could have compounded for another 20 years. But in distribution mode, you're already at the finish line. The opportunity cost runs in the opposite direction. The cost is the experience you didn't have. Now you're asking yourself, so what do I actually do about all this? Because awareness is nice, but it doesn't solve the problem. And here's where I'm going to give you 3 specific, non-generic takeaways that actually address the underlying psychology, not just the surface behavior. First, build a permission structure for spending. This sounds simple, but most people don't have one. They have a budget, maybe, but a budget is defensive. It tells you what you can't do. What you need is an offensive framework that explicitly gives you permission to spend on specific categories without guilt. I'm talking about a formal decision tree. If the portfolio is above X amount and the market hasn't dropped more than Y% in the last 12 months, then I am pre-authorized to spend Z dollars on travel or experiences or whatever matters to you. Write it down. Make it a rule. Because in the moment, your scarcity wiring will always find reasons to say no. You need a pre-commitment device that overrides that. Second, schedule identity interviews with yourself. This is going to sound weird, but once a quarter, literally sit down and write out answers to the question, who am I now? Not who were you, not who you're trying to be. Who are you right now in this phase of life without reference to your old job title or past accomplishments? The goal is to actively construct a self-concept that doesn't depend on external validation. Most people never do this. They just coast on their old identity until it stops working, and then they panic. Treat identity like a skill you're building, not a fixed trait you either have or don't. Third, create forcing functions for experiences, not goals. Goals are future-focused and easy to postpone. Forcing functions are commitment devices that remove your ability to defer. Don't say, I want to visit Japan someday. Book the tickets for 8 months from now. Pay the non-refundable deposit. Create a forcing function that makes inaction more painful than action. Because your default setting is to optimize for optionality and avoid commitment. You need external structure that forces you to actually live the retirement you theoretically wanted. Here's the part no one wants to hear. Most of what makes retirement satisfying or miserable isn't about the money. It's about whether you can update your psychological operating system to match your new circumstances. And most people can't or won't because the old operating system is what made them successful. They're afraid that if they let go of optimization and striving and preparation, they'll become irrelevant or lose their edge. But here's the thing, you already won. You made it to retirement with resources. The game changed. And if you keep playing the old game, you'll win nothing except the opportunity to feel anxious for another 20 years. I've been doing this long enough to see the pattern. The people who thrive in retirement aren't the ones with the most money. They're the ones who figured out how to recalibrate their threat detection systems, disentangle their self-worth from their productivity, and give themselves permission to actually use the freedom they spent decades building toward. Everyone else just imports their career stress into a context where it doesn't even make sense anymore. And look, what 99% of people do is usually what not to do. 99% of retirees keep running the same mental programs they ran during their working years. They optimize, they compare, they defer, they protect, and then they wonder why retirement feels like a longer, slower version of the stress they thought they were escaping. You want a different outcome? Run different software. The money part is the easy part. You can hire someone to manage your portfolio. The psychology part, the identity part, the permission to live part, no one's going to do that for you. And if you wait for it to feel natural or comfortable, you'll wait forever because your brain is optimized for survival and status competition, not for contentment. Contentment is something you have to build intentionally against your defaults. So here's the real question. You've spent 40 years becoming the kind of person who could afford to retire. Are you willing to spend the next 5 years becoming the kind of person who can actually enjoy it? Because I'm telling you, those are two completely different skill sets. And the second one matters more.